Hello, and welcome back to Schlyde into Sports, live on 103.1 FM on WVLP Radio. I'm your host, Ryan Schlyde, aka Schlyde, and today, even though there's not really a lot going on besides MLB, today is going to be all college sports because SEC Media Days were last week, Big Ten Media Days are this week, and we're kind of on the precipice of the college football season. So there's a lot that we got to get into today. The first thing, I do have a quick little update about the Protect College Sports Act from Tony Petitti. He has a little update there. SEC in actual discussions to leave, or as some people are saying online, secede from the NCAA. And also, like I said before, talking about SEC Media Days, Big Ten Media Days, and also a interesting thing with college jersey patch deals. Those new this year. It was announced back in January, I believe I talked about it on a previous broadcast, but it is a completely new thing that is rather interesting. And I have a little bit of an interesting take on it just because, the patches, they could be from anybody. It ranges from JP Morgan Chase to small federal credit unions to Culver's. So, yeah, this does actually or all of these things go into a lot of what we talk about here on the show, which is college sports, rules and regulations, and the trickle-down effects that they have in other sports. So, with that being said, let's get right into this. So, first thing I'm going to start off with is the update. So, according to Yahoo Sports, Tony Petitti shared an update on Protect College Sports Act and says the amended bill should arrive shortly. And this, I believe, was at one of the Big Ten Conference Media Days. He says the past 10 days have been hundreds of phone calls discussing key aspects of the bill. It is important to understand that this bill sets forth very specific language on how college sports will operate going forward. After a lot of productive work, it is absolutely imperative that we see the amended language of the bill. We cannot change our position until we see the amended bill and have an opportunity to share it with our leadership. And I will say, literally, just prior to walking up here, we expect to see the amended bill shortly. So, we are going to see something very soon. Obviously, last week, according to what I was looking at, we were supposed to see something by the end of the week last week, and still haven't seen anything until now, until this Yahoo Sports article. So, yeah. So, just for the people that maybe are new listeners or haven't really kept up with the Protect College Sports Act, the Protect College Sports Act takes aim at conference realignment, eligibility, media rights, coach movement, and the transfer portal, among other issues. The Big Ten and the SEC say they don't support the bill in its current form, which I think the one thing that they actually do support is the 5 years and 5 years on eligibility. I think that's something that everybody right now is behind or can get behind. But essentially right now, the reason why there's amendments that are being made to the bill is because the Big Ten and SEC aren't particularly happy with the language because of conference realignment, for one thing. But yeah, Big Ten presidents, they speak to the senators about the Protect College Sports Act. This was earlier in the month. 4 Big Ten presidents met with Ted Cruz and Cantwell about the Protect College Sports Act and said the talks were productive. The 4 schools who spoke to the senators were Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State, and USC. So some of the bigger names within the Big Ten, obviously Michigan, Penn State, and Ohio State, 3 Big Ten schools that have recently dominated in the college football sphere, or other spheres like Michigan recently kind of dominating a little bit more in college basketball. USC, one of the newer schools that was added a few years ago, but USC is a huge name nonetheless. They say, we appreciate the effort behind the Protect College Sports Act and support the bill's intent. At the same time, key issues should be addressed to ensure the bill protects student athletes and provides long-term stability for colleges, universities, and conferences. And one of the things that they are referencing here is the fact that, and this is something that's completely new, the bill says that, or like at least the bill in its current form, I should say, talks about conference realignment and how if one school, let's just say, I don't know, Iowa decides to move from the Big 10 to the Big 12 to hold on to that rivalry game with Iowa State because for some odd reason, due to schedule changes and new additions to the Big 10 conference, they aren't able to hold that as a non-conference game. And Iowa, their biggest rival is Iowa State. So what would they do? Well, if they left the Big 10 conference, they would become an independent school for 5 years. They would have to remain independent before joining the Big 12. If that switch was to happen. I'm not saying that would happen. This is a extremely hypothetical scenario. Very hypothetical. There's no, I guess, recent basis upon it. Like it's just a hypothetical scenario that I came up with in my head. Like Iowa is not going to leave the Big 10 as far as we know. Anyways, the only exception to this rule is schools like Notre Dame and UConn who are already independent. So if Notre Dame and UConn were to join a conference, they would be able to join that conference immediately. The 5-year independent rule where they would have to wait would be null and void because those schools are already independent. They're not a part of a conference. So the only thing with those schools, though, is media deals, specifically with Notre Dame. Let's just say Notre Dame was to move to the Big 10, because with regards to conference expansion, schools would be allowed to have either 19 or 20 teams. And honestly, I talked about this last week a little bit. I think having an odd number of teams in your conference is preposterous. And I talked about how it's kind of screwing with the ACC a little bit, because last year the tiebreakers didn't screw the ACC enough in college football. Now we're going to have an odd number of teams in our conference and move to a 9-game schedule and completely mess with everything in college football even more than before. But with that being said, that opens the door for a school like Notre Dame to join the Big 10. The Big 10 currently has 18 teams in their conference. At least based on how talks have been going, at least the way people are talking about conference expansion, a lot of people think that Notre Dame should just join the Big 10. A lot of people are very much in favor of Notre Dame joining the Big 10. The only reason, two of the reasons why Notre Dame does not join a conference right now is because of their media deal with NBC, where NBC exclusively covers Notre Dame games all the time, especially in South Bend. They take all the South Bend games, plus or minus one or two. It depends on if they were to travel to USC, then that game would not be covered by NBC anymore. It would be covered by CBS or Fox, the networks that cover the Big 10, because it would be at a Big 10 venue. But if it's in South Bend, then it's covered by Notre Dame. Another exception to that rule was in the postseason, not last year, but the year before, the first year of the 12-team playoff, where Notre Dame hosted IU, and in the postseason, the College Football Playoff Committee, or not necessarily committee, but the College Football Playoff Organization, I should say, because the College Football Playoff Organization is separate from the NCAA. It's a really weird relationship, to say the least, but they're separate from the NCAA. But all of the games in the College Football Playoff are broadcasted by ESPN. So neither CBS, Fox, or NBC had broadcasting rights for the Notre Dame versus IU playoff game. That went to ESPN. So there's a little bit of complexity there in terms of the media deals. Now, on another point, another reason that Notre Dame likes to be independent is because they have a lot of long-standing traditional games that they play. They play Army, they play Navy, they play USC. Those are like their three big ones, and then they also play a bunch of other schools. I think since they're a partial member of the ACC, like they're a member school, but not with college football. So like sports like swimming, basketball, track and field, all those sports are a member of the ACC conference. Since they're a partial member of the ACC conference, they are obligated to play, I think, either 5 or 6 ACC games. It might actually be 7, but either way, they are supposed to play ACC games due to their agreement. It's a very complex agreement, so that way Notre Dame can still maintain its tradition while also making a stupid amount of money from NBC. So, yeah, Notre Dame is the big winner. And now they're also the big winner in terms of college football playoff standing because, I've talked about this on a previous broadcast. I don't remember which month, but it was around the time when the college football playoff committee met up and talked about playoff expansion, whether we would expand to 16 teams, whether we'd expand to 24 teams, other, rules that needed to be discussed. One of the big topics of discussion in that room was Notre Dame being left out of the college football playoff. They made a rule where if Notre Dame is in the top 12, Notre Dame is an automatic qualifier. So that was a huge, huge rabbit that was pulled out of the hat for Notre Dame, for sure. I think that definitely helps them in pretty much every way. You look at the way that they've ranked the past 5 seasons, definitely since Marcus Smart has taken over, but even before that with Brian Kelly, Notre Dame was consistently in the top 15 plus or minus 2 years. I think there's 2 really bad years under Brian Kelly, maybe 1 bad year under Marcus Smart. It might have been just his first year, but anyway, point is, Notre Dame consistently in the top 25. They're consistently one of the top programs in college football. Now, part of that controversy is the schedule. Is it because of Notre Dame's schedule? Because they are able to have a reason to schedule Army and Navy without, having those games be pretty much non-consequential, I guess, because they recruit differently than Army and Navy do, as do pretty much every school within the FBS. You could definitely make that argument. I know Texas is definitely making that argument because last year they missed the college football playoff, and at the SEC media days, which, we'll move on to that in a second. During the SEC media days, Steve Sarkisian, one of the big things that he was complaining about, per usual, is missing the college football playoffs because they scheduled Ohio State. It's like, no, it's not because you scheduled Ohio State. It's because you lost to Ohio State. And even then, even if you lost to Ohio State, you dropped a game to Florida that you should not have dropped. Florida was one of the worst teams in the SEC last year. There's no question about that. None at all. And you dropped it. You lost. And that was your third loss. If you didn't lose to... I don't hear you saying, oh, if we didn't lose to Florida, we would have been in the play. No, you're not saying that because it doesn't help your argument in terms of scheduling tough non-conference opponents. Because the narrative that Steve Sarkisian is trying to push is that, oh, well, we schedule tough non-conference opponents. The SEC is the toughest conference in college football, which is becoming less and less true as the years go on, by the way. That's becoming more apparent, especially ever since the NIL era, the retirement of Nick Saban, and really the downfall of Dabo Swinney, which, he's not in the SEC, but he's one of the more traditional coaches, so to speak. So, just noting those events tells us the downfall, at least in college football, with the SEC. The only thing right now that the SEC seems to have complete dominance in is college baseball. Because you look at what people consider the big three right now, which is college football, men's basketball, and women's basketball. Those are the big three in college sports right now. And last year, the Big Ten had a school win in each of them. They had Indiana win in football, they had Michigan win in men's basketball, and they had UCLA win in women's basketball in both of those March Madness tournaments. But because of the overall history, even though this is a different era, and yes, when you look at overall history, it's definitely interesting to look at for sure. I mean, you look at Indiana. Indiana now has a national championship, and literally months before they won the national championship, Indiana had the most losses in college football history. And then they become undefeated, and are the first undefeated national champion that went 16-0 since Yale, I think almost 136 years ago or something like that. One of the first college football national championship games. But yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at on that, at least. But yeah, just kind of looking at the preseason media poll that the SEC came out with, or at least it's on the SEC Sports website, but it's not their rankings, it's just the media rankings. But just the predicted order of finish, and I'll, I guess, list my opinions on what I think about the order of the finish. I will say there's some pretty shocking spots where people are at, I will say. But Georgia's at number one. I don't think that really surprises anybody. Georgia's been on top of the SEC now for the past 5 years. Even with Alabama taking an SEC championship or two out from under them when Saban was there, Georgia in the 2020s has been the dominant SEC school. Texas is at number two. That's largely because of Arch Manning and the players that they brought in from the transfer portal. There's a lot of hype around Texas. This is Arch's third year, and he had a great showing at the end of the year. That's for sure. I mean, he looked really good at the end of the year. So there's a lot of optimism behind this Texas team right now. Ole Miss being at number three, I will say that was quite shocking because a lot of people were kind of talking down Ole Miss this year. But yeah, Ole Miss, they make it in at number three. They're the only other school that scored 2,000 points in the scoring system. Texas A&M was pretty close behind him at number four. LSU at number five. I don't necessarily have an issue with this top five. I will say I was just surprised at Ole Miss being number three. I thought for sure Ole Miss would have came in at 5 or 6. And speaking of 6, Alabama came in at number 6, Oklahoma at 7, Tennessee 8, Florida 9. Now that was a shock just because this is a completely different Florida team. You have a new quarterback, you have a new head coach, you have a lot of new pieces that are in there, and a lot of these new pieces that are in there on this Florida team are not from the Tulane team that John Summerall coached at, because one of the things that he said when he left was, I'm not taking any of the kids from Tulane because I want them to finish out their careers at Tulane. I'm not going to poach Tulane, the school that gave me the opportunity to become a head coach and to become noticed for the Florida job. So that was his way of paying homage to Tulane. So this Florida roster, it's going to be very interesting to see what it looks like. The fact that it's ranked at 9 on the media preseason list is surprising and also kind of reassuring, at least to Florida fans. But you also look back at last year where DJ Lagway, who was the quarterback, he was a Heisman hopeful. People had him in the top 5 for the Heisman last year, and he did not even come close to that. So we'll see what happens. Missouri at 10, kind of surprising because they are going to have Amon Hardy coming back, and he was one of the best running backs last year. South Carolina at 11 after the year they had last year, also very surprising. They do have Lenora Sellers coming back, so I think they're expecting him to have a bounce back year. You've got Auburn at 12. Kind of surprising, but not really. I think this is around where they were last year, not in preseason, but just where they finished. This poll is also based on where people think that they're going to finish as well. But a lot of that is based off of the moves in the offseason and the optimism that they have of the team going into this season and how they think they're going to complete their schedule. You've got Vanderbilt at 13. Kind of surprising, not really. I did expect Vanderbilt to fall down in the rankings just because they don't have Diego Pavia, they don't have their star tight end, so they're going to have a little bit more of a younger roster, a little bit more of an inexperienced roster, but I could see Vanderbilt surprising some people this year. You've got Kentucky at 14, which I find absolutely hilarious, simply because the new head coach of Kentucky, one of the things that he said in the media day is that, like, he was asked why Kentucky is going to be good or something along those lines, and he goes, because of me. It's because I'm here. Like, he just said that, and, preseason they're ranked 14th. Which, I don't know. It's just a cruel irony that I think is hilarious. 15, you got Mississippi State, and 16, you've got Arkansas. Arkansas seems to have the least amount of optimism behind it, not just because they're in last, but because they have a new head coach. The Arkansas program has been a complete train wreck the past, I couldn't even tell you how many years. What, like 10 years? Probably more, to be honest. But it just has not been great for Arkansas. But yeah, I will say, just kind of going back to Ole Miss being at number 3, something to note with this Ole Miss team is that they do still have Trinidad Chambliss, who is one of the most experienced quarterbacks right now in college football. He was one of the best in the college football playoff last year. They also have Kewan Lacey, who was his number 1 target. So Ole Miss this year, gonna have to keep an eye out on them. Even though they have a new head coach, not a lot of changes on the roster, at least in terms of the key players that they needed to stay. I think you could have argued to put Ole Miss at 2. I think there definitely was an argument for that. But we've only seen Pete Golding as the head coach of Ole Miss for 3 games. The one against Georgia, the one against Miami, they lost, and then the one against Tulane. So there's not really a lot to go on with his coaching. A lot of people are saying, well, is it because it was Lane's roster? Is it because Pete Golding, was able to say something like to motivate the players, or the players just extra motivated because they were pissed off that Lane left? There's a lot that you can look at and take apart and be like, maybe that's why they did so well in the playoffs. Maybe that's why they made a run to the semifinals. Were the best performing SEC team in, not even just in the college football playoffs, but just in the postseason in general, in the bowl season. So I don't know. It's a lot. There's a lot of questions around this Ole Miss team, but I do think that they will surprise some people for sure. But yeah. So just going to, I guess, quickly make a prediction before we take a quick break. So not even just basing this off of the list, but I'm just going to make a prediction on the SEC championship. And I'm going to do the same thing for the Big 10 and Big 12 and the ACC later on in the broadcast. But I'm just making this prediction now since, we've been so focused on talking about the SEC the past few minutes. I'm just going to make a quick little prediction for the SEC championship. I think the way it's going to end up, I think it's probably going to be Georgia and Ole Miss. And I think part of it is because I think Ole Miss is going to surprise some people. Georgia is a very consistent program under Kirby Smart. And I just think Texas will drop a game that they really shouldn't drop, and at least like within the SEC conference schedule. And I think that's going to mess them up. I think that's going to put them just out of reach of the SEC championship. I do think that Texas will make the college football playoffs, though. I think Georgia, Texas, and Ole Miss are sure things for the college football playoff. And I do think that fourth spot, which SEC is pretty much guaranteed 4 spots in the college football playoff. I think 5 is kind of generous. It really depends on how things finish up within the other conferences. But I think that 4th spot is definitely going to be between Texas A&M and LSU. I think the preseason predicted order of finish is correct on that front, where Texas A&M and LSU are going to have that 4 and 5 spot. I think ultimately I do favor Texas A&M a little bit more, simply because when Lane Kiffin does transfer to a different team, or like he switches jobs, normally he takes a couple steps back before he takes 4 steps forward. So I think we're probably going to see LSU underperform this year despite their insane roster that they have. So that's just kind of where my head's at right now with the SEC in terms of playoff predictions, like teams I think are going to make it and teams that will make it to the SEC championship. I'm not really sure who would win the SEC championship. I would love to see Ole Miss win. That would be hilarious. But yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at with that. But there was also something else I wanted to talk about. The SEC possibly breaking away from the NCAA. So after all this talk about the SEC and, playoff predictions and media days, championship predictions for college football, there have been the discussions about the SEC leaving the NCAA have kind of come back. They existed before, but it's become a topic of discussion again with the act, with the Protect College Sports Act. A lot of this is being brought up due to the frustration that the SEC higher-ups have with the language of the bill, which, again, talked a little bit about earlier, but kind of more from the Big Ten side. But the reason why people are bringing up the SEC leaving is not only because of that, but because it's been brought up before. So there's really 3 reasons. There's the lack of enforcement of the NCAA effectively enforcing its own rules and handling violations, regulatory impasse, just discontent among university presidents within the SEC and chancellors regarding proposed bills that don't align with SEC financial and structural goals. And there is that desire for self-governance. They want to independently manage athletes' compensation, transfers, and eligibility rules. The potential impacts that this has, you've got the self-contained postseason. So how postseason would kind of work, you basically just, at least in terms of college basketball, you just have the SEC tournament. That would pretty much be the postseason for the SEC, and that would be it. They would not be a part of March Madness. For sports like swimming and track, those conference championships, that's it. There's no national championships. It is just the conference championships. So it hosts its own playoffs operating under its own silo. Uncertainty in other sports is, again, kind of what I was just talking about before. Football is what drives the discussion, but a split could jeopardize participation for other collegiate sports like swimming, track and field, tennis, wrestling, baseball, all those. And then there's the legal and financial risks. Leaving the NCAA umbrella exposes the conference to heavy antitrust scrutiny and complicates existing revenue and bowl partnerships. So, again, yes, the bowl seasons are separate from the NCAA, but because the SEC would become its own thing, separate from the NCAA, bowl season would just be extra complicated. And postseason for other sports, like I said before, it would just be the conference championships. That's pretty much it. There would not be national championships. And ultimately, I think it would not only hurt the SEC, But I think it would hurt the NCAA as well. Like, I think the SEC and the NCAA both do need each other in some way, because you look at some of the programs that the SEC has that compete with the other schools, like at least like the other conferences. There are very fun competitions that you watch in the bowl season, in the non-conference for college football, in March Madness, in the non-conference basketball games that happen at the beginning of the year, like the Maui Invitational, right? Like there's a lot of cool a lot of cool games and outcomes that you see with all these schools competing. And that ultimately is what drives the revenue. And I think, these discussions, I wouldn't take them too seriously. I think it's more of a leverage thing, because again, I think the SEC believes that it is the superior conference within college football, which in turn, some people are arguing within the entire NCAA. So it's going to be interesting to follow, but the memes about it have been absolutely hilarious, because people are making memes about the South seceding because they don't get what they want, and oversimplifying the Civil War as that being the reason why the Southern states seceded, because they're just, people are making that comparison online, and it's just going absolutely viral. But with that being said, before we talk about the Big Ten media days and also preseason media poll for the Big Ten, just kind of my take on it, and also ACC and Big 12, we're going to take a quick break and hear a message from our sponsor.
This broadcast is brought to you by Authentic Impact, a Northwest Indiana executive coaching practice working with family businesses to ensure their legacy. When you started your business, you made a promise to do things differently, better than anyone else. Over time, as the business grows, that promise can get diluted or even lost. Penny Schlyde at Authentic Impact helps family business owners reignite that promise, weaving it into team engagement, performance, and hiring, so your passion becomes the heartbeat of your company again. Learn more at authentic-impact-coaching.com.
Okay, so Big Ten. Now, obviously, we went into it a little bit. I'm going to kind of go more into the storylines within the, heading into the Big Ten media days. So here's just kind of my overall reaction to these 5 storylines that Yahoo Sports has. So the first one, how are Michigan, Michigan State, and Penn State doing under first-year head coaches? Because all of them have first-year head coaches due to different circumstances, to say the least. Michigan State probably was the most normal of the circumstances, which to some people might be unusual, because Michigan State has, had weird things happen with coach firings in the past. But Penn State had James Franklin, which, I remember this time last week I went into a whole rant about how I accidentally called James Franklin Ben Franklin. And I seriously need to make a meme about that or something, because oh my word. But anyways, Penn State fires James Franklin mid-year, which was shocking to everybody. But I mean, that wasn't the only shocking part. The other shocking part was the fact that they lost to UCLA after losing to Oregon and then losing to Northwestern at home. It was just an abysmal middle of the season for Penn State. They almost beat Indiana at one point under the interim head coach, but they didn't keep him, which interesting. But yeah, then Michigan State, they picked up Northwestern's old coach, and Michigan, obviously, they had a very crazy exchange with coaches where Kyle Whittingham currently is the head coach, but before that, why am I blanking on his name right now? The previous Michigan head coach, he had an incident with assault and battery that I've talked about before on the broadcast when it came out. But yeah, Michigan State, they've got Pat Fitzgerald, who's the old Northwestern head coach. Michigan somehow was able to get Kyle Whittingham out of retirement, and Penn State, after about a 2.5 month long, 3 month long search for a new head coach, they picked up Matt Campbell, and not only Matt Campbell, but pretty much his entire roster from Iowa State. So, yeah, I am very curious to see how they do. I mean, the offseason was definitely interesting for both of them. I think right now, Penn State probably is in the best situation out of the three. I do think Michigan still has the better roster because they do still have pretty much their entire roster from last year that's still here. And honestly, I think Kyle Whittingham is definitely an upgrade in coaching for sure. I think that's a really great fit for Michigan. I don't know how they came out of that with Kyle Whittingham, but props to Michigan. Props to Michigan for that. But yeah. Now, the next one, this is the one where I might go on a little bit more of a rant, but this one is, what is Indiana's approach to proving 2025 wasn't a fluke? So I'm 90% sure that this was a storyline last year, except take away 2025 and put in 2024 because Indiana went on their first ever double-digit win season. They made it to the college football playoff for the first time, and then they lost to Notre Dame. And everybody was like, oh, was that a fluke? Was that a fluke? And now because Indiana won the national championship, we somehow have to prove that it's not a fluke. It's like, well, what do you want? What do you want from us? What do you want us to do to prove that's not a fluke? How many times are we going to go through this where it's a fluke or not a fluke? Like, we can just do this dance forever, or we will do this dance forever. I don't know. It's ridiculous. Like, do we have to go out and win another national championship for what? For us to go into next year and have the storyline be, what is Indiana's approach to proving 2026 wasn't a fluke after winning the national championship? Again. I don't know. It's just completely ridiculous, but yeah. One of the things that it says is, following one of the most surprising seasons in college football, Indiana now faces the challenge of meeting heightened expectations rather than trying to exceed them. The Hoosiers are, well, I mean, how can you exceed national champion? I don't know. I don't know. It's exceed national championship. How? Somebody please. Like, how? What is beyond a national? Do we have to get a world title? Is that what they want from us? It's ridiculous. But it says the Hoosiers are no longer the underdog that caught everyone by surprise. I mean, I don't really think we were an underdog last year, but I'm also an IU fan, so whatever. But I mean, after the year before, I would not have considered IU an underdog at all. Nope. Maybe against Oregon and maybe against Ohio State, maybe against Penn State, but against, making the college football playoff, no. Like, we were going to make it again. It was inevitable. But, Penn State we were kind of lucky that Penn State crapped the bed the way that they did. And, we had a much stronger roster than Oregon did, at least on the line of scrimmage. So that ultimately was what won us those two games in the beginning. And then we faced off against Oregon again in the Peach Bowl, killed them, and the Big Ten Championship against Ohio State, where we beat them, and that was a really close game. That was a really, really close game. And that one we definitely were underdogs in because we had not beaten Ohio State in 40 years since before the iPhone came out. Like that, it had been that long. Okay, it had been that long. But yeah. Obviously, Signetti is going to be full of questions. He's going to have a lot of questions asked about whether or not he can maintain the success of last season without that element of surprise. I mean, I do get that an element of surprise is definitely helpful. I mean, you look at games where there's these crazy upsets like Northern Illinois over Notre Dame. Did anybody expect that to happen? No, absolutely not. No, Northern Illinois definitely had the element of surprise going in to Notre Dame 2 years ago when Notre Dame went on that run to the national championship game where they ultimately lost to Ohio State. But ever since that loss, they went on an absolute tear. But the reason why they lost that game was because they didn't play like they had anything to play for in that game. So I think, yeah, in that sense, sure, it might be a little bit tougher, but at the same time, I feel like people will say something like that to kind of discredit Indiana and the success of the program of getting to a national championship and winning a national championship last year. But that's just my opinion. The next storyline you've got is, will Ohio State reload enough to get back to the title game? And I mean, Ohio State's always reloading with talent from the portal, talent from high school, which talked a little bit about Indiana doing that last week, and they're starting to do that, which is why I think there's going to be a continued dominance of Indiana football for a little while. It's not just going to be for 2 years, that's for sure. While Sig is in Bloomington, I think the reign of Indiana football is going to remain for a little while. But yeah, I think year after year, Ohio State constantly is reloading with top talent from everywhere. They had 11 players drafted in the spring, which is really good. 3 of them were in the first round, which is insane, to say the least. But they do keep Julian Sayin and Jeremiah Smith, who are arguably the best 1-2 combination in college football right now. So I think right now Ohio State definitely has a favorable path of making it to the national title game this coming year. Do I think it's going to be easy? No, absolutely not. They're going to have to get through Indiana middle of the year. They're going to have to get through Michigan at the end of the year, which I think Michigan this year is going to be a very tough opponent. I think Michigan is an easy team to underlook this year, but with Kyle Whittingham at the reins, Bryce Underwood still at quarterback, all their key pieces still there. I mean, that game is going to be extremely competitive, to say the least. I mean, it always is, but I feel like more so than last year. But yeah, I think it will be very interesting to see what Ohio State does this coming year. The next one, is this the year Oregon finally gets over the hump? And kind of like the Indiana one, I feel like this is one that we consistently ask all the time. When is Oregon going to get over that hump of getting to and win, or not just getting to, but winning a national championship? Which, still kind of crazy that Indiana somehow got a national championship before Oregon did, but here we are. This is the world we live in today, and you can't change it. But yeah, Oregon, kind of like Notre Dame, consistently mentioned among the list of people's teams that they consider the best. Like, Oregon is in the name, like, Oregon is listed off among the names like Alabama and Clemson and Ohio State and Michigan. Like, Florida State, arguably, I mean, they won a national title in the 2010s, but you get my point. Like, they're schools that people can list off where, which school do you consider the best based on recent performance or consistency of making it to big moments? And Oregon is one of those teams that consistently makes it to that big moment. But they've never won. They've never won the national title. And this year, I do think that they could make a breakthrough because they still have Dante Moore at quarterback. And I think they really built up their defense in the transfer portal this year. I'm a little bit nervous about Oregon's defense heading into next year. Their secondary is going to be absolutely insane. And yeah. The last storyline that Yahoo Sports has. Can another Big Ten team shock the world like Indiana? I don't think it's possible. I really don't. The way Indiana shocked everybody, I don't think you can really replicate that, because we've talked about it not even just today on today's broadcast, but on previous broadcasts. They were the worst team in college football history, not just in Big Ten history, in the entire college football history. and then they go and win a national championship. I don't think you can ever replicate that. You just can't. Northwestern, I would say, is the closest to having the opportunity to replicate that, simply because Northwestern now has the most losses in college football all time. So, yeah, I guess if Northwestern somehow comes out of nowhere under Pat Fitzgerald and makes it to the college football playoff and wins a national championship in his first year, I would say that would be shocking the world like Indiana. But otherwise, I don't really think that any other Big Ten team can shock the world like Indiana. And in this article, they list Iowa, USC, Illinois, and Nebraska. And in my mind, I'm like, really? Really? Like, these are schools that have either won national championships before or have been consistent enough to not be last at really any point in the Big Ten or Pac-12, wherever you came from, depending on the year that you're looking back to. I mean, none of those schools that were listed off are anywhere close to being able to surprise us the way that Indiana did. I'm sorry, but Yahoo Sports, you can do better than that. Come on. You guys could have listed off like Purdue or Northwestern, but listing a range of Iowa, USC, Illinois, and Nebraska, which, by the way, are all practically right next to each other in the Big Ten standings in the preseason media poll, is beyond me. But, I mean, there's a little bit of range, but for the most part, they're all right next to each other. Like, Iowa, Illinois, and Nebraska are all right next to each other, and they're in the upper 2/3 of the rankings. But with that being said, let's talk about the Big Ten preseason media poll rankings. So, Ohio State, Oregon, and Indiana were both very close at 1, 2, and 3. Ohio State was put at 1, Oregon at 2, Indiana at 3. And honestly, going into this year, I think you could flip those around any way that you want to. I'm not, like, obviously, with Indiana winning the national title last year, I think they should honorarily get the number 1 preseason spot. But, I mean, that's also based on last year when Ohio State honorarily got the number 1 spot after beating Texas, who was at number 1, and Ohio State having an objectively soft schedule. And I'm saying objectively because there are arguments that Ohio State's schedule was not really that soft, but there's definitely a lot of arguments where they are. But, yeah, Ohio State got the nod last year in the AP poll because they won the national championship the year before. So it's like, well, are we going to do the same thing for Indiana? No, we're not. Then you've got USC at number 4, Michigan at 5. I think those two are pretty interchangeable. I like Michigan a little bit more than USC, but that's just me. I just think USC always find, at least with under Lincoln Riley's tutelage, they've always found some way to mess it up somehow. With Notre Dame not on their schedule, I think that definitely helps them for sure because Notre Dame's owned them the last 3 years, but that's besides the point. Penn State at 6. I think that's a little bit high for Penn State. They do have Iowa State's old roster, which was a good roster. It was a top 25 roster, but I just think, them being above Washington with the return of Damon Williams, I think is criminal to do, like doing that to Damon Williams in Washington and Jed Fish and that roster. But I think Washington is a team in the Big Ten that definitely could surprise some people for sure. Maybe even make the college football playoffs. I think they're actually, for me, they're a dark horse to make the college football playoffs because I think a lot of people are going to underlook them. They have a relatively favorable schedule, but they also have opportunities to knock down teams that are above them. So I think Washington is a team that I think we should keep an eye on next year. Then you've got Iowa at 8, which I think that's pretty normal. That's not really unexpected. I mean, you can't really put them any higher, to be honest, but yeah, I mean, we don't really know anything about the quarterback that they have coming in. Quarterback from last year, he declared for the draft. I think he was signed as a free agent, but anyways, Illinois is at 9. They lose out on Luke Altmaier and several other players, so I think 9 for Illinois is the right spot. Minnesota at 10, I think that's relatively reasonable. You could argue Nebraska to go above them, but I think Minnesota at 10, not too bad. Nebraska at 11 is not too bad. Wisconsin at 12, I think, is interesting simply because besides the Notre Dame game, they actually do have a pretty favorable schedule on their hands, which could allow them to maybe sneak into the top 10 of the Big Ten. So, going to be keeping an eye on this Wisconsin team a little bit as well. Then you've got UCLA at 13. Understandable. They return a lot of key people. They return Nico Imaliava, who now has more experience. I think he looked a lot more comfortable at UCLA than he did at Tennessee. I think with the new coaching over at UCLA, I think he should do better, at least good enough to be 13th in the Big Ten. They've got Northwestern at 14th. I think with Pat Fitzgerald over there, I think Northwestern could maybe could maybe make some noise, but yeah. Oh, wait, no, Pat Fitzgerald's at Michigan State. Never mind. But I think Northwestern's a team that it's like every other year they're really good, and every other year they're not good. Like, they're just absolutely terrible. And last year they were pretty bad last year. So I think Northwestern could just randomly surprise us for no reason whatsoever. They've got Maryland at 15, which don't hate that. Michigan State at 16, don't really hate that either. They have Pat Fitzgerald. They are the ones that have Pat Fitzgerald. I was looking at Michigan State when I was talking about Northwestern. Whoops. But yeah, Michigan State is at 16. They've got Pat Fitzgerald, the coach. Kind of curious to see what happens with them. I don't think they're really going to make a lot of noise this year, but I think next year could be quite interesting. Then you've got Rutgers at 17 and Purdue at 18, which I think that's pretty accurate. But I think most of the issue that I have with the Big Ten preseason media poll is really the middle. I mean, it's really the middle part, like the upper middle part. Like 5 through 9 is where I have the issue. Or not even 5 through 9, 4 through 9 is where I have the issue. Because I think Michigan should be above USC. I think Washington should be above Penn State. Arguably above USC as well, but maybe not. I feel like Washington and USC are closer than people think. And then I guess Iowa and Illinois are fine. So I guess maybe it is just 4 through 7. But yeah, that's pretty much where my head's at right now with the Big Ten. And now with the ACC, you've got, which I think this really should be a no-brainer, is Miami, then Clemson, then Louisville, then SMU. Those are no-brainers. Absolute no-brainers. I think Virginia Tech you probably could throw in to the top 4, maybe in place of SMU, but it's basically Penn State just in the SEC. So maybe Virginia Tech makes it to the ACC title. Then you've got Virginia, which I think Virginia could be interesting next year. You've got Florida State, Georgia Tech. I'm actually really excited to see what Georgia Tech does next year with Alberto Mendoza at quarterback. I think that will be a good fit. Then you've got Pitt at 9, Duke at 10, NC State at 11, North Carolina somehow at 12, and then Cal at 13, Wake Forest at 14, even though Wake Forest had a 9-5 season last year, and they still have their coach, but I think it's because they have to rebuild because their players are always leaving. Then you've got Syracuse at 15, Boston College at 16, and Stanford at 17. So it's not really shocking by any stretch of the means, but yeah, that's where we're at right now with the ACC. I don't really have any argument over ACC teams over another. That's just kind of where I'm at with the ACC. But ACC always is full of surprises, to say the least. But yeah, now I guess just moving on to the Big 12, which should be pretty interesting. It's always interesting, but Big 12. So rankings for the Big 12, it's not necessarily by anybody, like, I don't know this person. It's Snap to Tip Off, just off of Instagram. Not a lot of, he's kind of a smaller independent profile, but he's got Texas Tech at 1, which this ranking was made July 9th. So this might have been around the time there was still uncertainty with Brendan Sorsby. So I think Texas Tech at 1 to start off, I don't necessarily like that. I don't like Texas Tech at 1. I do like their line, but with Brendan Sorsby out, I don't really know if they're going to be able to have that offense function the way that they need it to be at number 1. They've got BYU at 2. I don't hate that. Utah at 3. Arizona at 4. I think Arizona actually, and this is going to just come out of absolutely nowhere, but they still are going to have no Fafita, and they're still going to have their running back room. And Arizona had one of the most underrated running back rooms last year. And they had an explosive ending to their season. And this might actually be insane. This might be my hottest take of the day, but I think Arizona wins the Big 12. I think Arizona's going to win the Big 12. And part of the reason is the Big 12 champion has been different year over year recently. So let's look. So Big 12 champion. So we're just going to look at it the last 10 years. We're just going to look at it the last 10 years. And I'm telling you, there hasn't been a repeat champion since Oklahoma in 2020. Ever since then, Baylor won it in 2021. Kansas State won it in 2022. Texas won it in 2023. Arizona State won it in 2024. And Texas Tech wins it in 2025. So the past 6 years, there has not been a repeat champion. And the only reason that there has been a repeat champion is because of Oklahoma. Because Oklahoma, despite what Texas fans will have you think, Oklahoma was the rulers of the Big 12, primarily. You look at just the list of teams that have won it going all the way back to 1996, and Oklahoma has won 14, while the next most is Texas at 4. So Oklahoma had a just complete stranglehold over the Big 12 conference. That is part of the reason why I think that there's going to be a new Big 12 champion. I think it's either going to be BYU or Arizona. Those are my two teams that I'm really liking going into the college football season with the Big 12. With that being said, that's all we got time for today. Next week, hopefully, we'll talk a little bit more about MLB. We'll talk about the Big Ten Conference Media Days, at least the responses. Talked a little bit about the SECs this week. If there's ACC and Big 12 Media Days, which I don't think those have happened yet, but I think those will be happening throughout the weeks as we get closer and closer and closer to the college football season. But yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about those media days. If there's any kind of update regarding the Protect College Sports Act, we're going to be talking about that as well. And I guess any other preseason things as well, we're going to be talking about those too. And also the College Swimming League. We are going to talk a little bit about the College Swimming League next week because they're starting to release, or they have been releasing some of the matches, and I'm just going to go into those matches and the order of events and I guess what it means in college sports, as well as the TV contract that College Swimming League has signed for broadcasting. If you didn't make it through, or if you weren't able to start at the beginning of the broadcast, you can always go back to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, YouTube, Patreon, Millions.co, and other podcasting platforms to go back and check out the beginning. But yeah, thanks for listening. And with that being said, I'll see you guys all next week. Schlyde out.